Hi, everybody. My name is Paul Barlow. I'm the Divisional Director of Sales and Marketing for Senior Lifestyle, and I just wanted to say good morning or good afternoon to you, depending on where you are, and welcome to Week 2, Session 2 of our Dementia 101 series. We're here with Cathleen O'Brien. She's the Vice President of Resident Experience, and she is going to be going over today behavioral expressions, managing difficult behaviors. Just a little housekeeping here. Everybody in the webinar is going to be muted. There is a box for questions. So if you, throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, please put that in there and we'll try to get everything answered as it comes. And then also at the end, after Kathleen finishes, we'll have time for some questions and I'll read them off to her. Thank you again for joining us. And Kathleen, here you are. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Paul. And thank you all for joining me today as we take a closer look at managing behaviors and emotions. Have you ever heard the saying, remember the person with dementia is not giving you a hard time? The person with dementia is having a hard time? I heard this quote many years ago, and it's a quote that has stuck with me throughout my personal and professional career. It's a quote that should hang in every home and memory care community. These are the two sentences that are the cornerstone to understanding what our loved ones are experiencing on a daily basis. So throughout today's presentation, we'll focus on a general overview of dementia and related behaviors. What are the potential causes and emotions of the behaviors? What is your loved one trying to tell you? And how can you add value to every conversation with your loved one? What emotion is your loved one trying to convey? These are all the basics that we'll cover throughout this presentation today. Before we get started, I'd like to pause for a moment and do a quick poll. What comes to mind when you hear the term behaviors? A, anger, B, aggression, C, wandering and pacing, D, restlessness, or E, all of the above. So we'll pause just a moment for you guys to put in your answers. Okay, Paul, did everyone get in their answers? Okay, we'll just move on. I'm not sure if everyone was able to get in their answers there, but the correct answer is all of the above. All of the above examples are what we consider behaviors. Hoarding, disrobing, swearing, inappropriate, or sometimes hypersexuality can also be examples. With dementia, it sometimes seems to bring out the best and worst parts of our loved one's personality. Other times, personalities seem to be completely different and our loved ones appear to be strangers. Esther was 4 feet 4 inches, a devoted single mom to her only daughter, and a devout Catholic. As dementia crept in, Esther's daughter Patty was shocked when Esther would begin to punctuate every sentence with very colorful language, words she never uttered throughout her entire life. Whether she was happy, sad, angry, or excited, Esther would always end her sentences with one swear word or another. Patty would often share that she tried to use those same words once at the age of 15 and had her mouth washed out with soap. Although Esther was very much the loving mother Patty remembered, Patty would often say it's like she bottled it up for 60 years and decided to let it all out. These are just some of the examples of the behavior expressions that our residents can exhibit. Behaviors are often defined as the non-cognitive symptoms that can present when someone is progressing through the stages of the disease. We all use behavior as a form of communication. We all experience behaviors as a response to the world around us. To some extent, behaviors are part of our personality and how we handle life situations. How many of you have ever had road rage? It's reminiscent of our times on the playground. Children who have not developed the ability to communicate their feelings verbally, instead express themselves physically. For our residents and your loved ones, dementia can damage the part of the brain that assists in communication or controlling impulses, causing these behavioral expressions. These are just some of the ways we're going to work through understanding behaviors. Orpha was one of the sweetest residents I've ever had the pleasure to connect and care for. Orpha was a resident who walked through the memory care neighborhood all day, usually smiling and always trying to help the other residents. Bob was a new resident who had moved in with us for a couple of days. Bob also liked to walk throughout the neighborhood, but he also liked to gather items along the way, which we called shopping. He would gather a tic-tac-toe board here, magazines from there, picture frames from over here, and even pillows. Shortly after Bob moved in, we started to notice Orpha would get frustrated at different times throughout the day. Due to Orpha's aphasia, a quick reminder for those of you who are able to join our first session, aphasia is the condition that affects a person's ability to communicate. In Orpha's case, she would use unrecognizable words, but based on her tone and expression, you could gauge whether she was happy, sad, or frustrated. One afternoon, I could see Orpha heading over to Bob at a very quick pace. When I stepped in and I said, "Hi, Orpha, how are you?" she turned to me and began pointing in Bob's direction and sounded very angry. And I said, "Oh my goodness, I know. He's moving things all around and making quite a mess. But don't you worry, I'm going to take care of it." Orpha looked at me, took a deep breath, gave me a quick hug, and walked away. I just assumed that when she saw Bob collecting his items and moving things about the neighborhood, it was upsetting to her. Acknowledging her frustration and letting her know that I understood and I was going to take care of it for her was enough to redirect her and calm her down. Had I not intervened, it could have turned into something more physical, which is not unheard of in a memory care neighborhood. Senior Lifestyles Embrace program focuses on connection being the key to every interaction with our residents. The relationships we form with our residents and their families and the knowledge we learn by observing and using our Embrace tools such as our Embrace History form enables us the unique opportunity to gain our residents' trust and achieve a solid understanding of who our residents are and make more meaningful relationships connections to be able to gently redirect and create interventions for any behavioral expressions that occur. For anyone who has ever had any experience moving into a memory care community, a lot of the communities will ask you to fill out what they call a life history or silhouette. We refer to it as our Embrace History. It's a very concrete, thorough document that talks about who a resident is and what they used to do and how they like to be interacted and how many children they had. And the reason that we ask our families to fill this out is because that really helps us get information into a glimpse into how we can redirect someone. For example, I had a woman who was a teacher who would often at 3 o'clock every day, she would head over to the door and set out the alarm. She was going home for the day. If you stood by the door and said, "No, come over here, we're not going out right now," she would get really angry. But if you looked at her and said, "Martha, can you tell me who the best 3rd grade teacher was?" she would walk over with you and sit down and talk to you on end about who she was as a teacher and what her favorite class was and how she liked to teach. And did she get up maybe half hour later to go test the doors again? Yes, but you could easily redirect her by getting her to talk about who she was. Teaching was a very big part of her life. It's important to note that as difficult and frustrating as some of these behaviors can be, they're not all negative, and oftentimes they're related to an unmet an unmet need, or emotion. All of the different forms of dementia affect the brain in one way or the other. And the brain is what controls our behaviors and our emotions. So it stands to reason that not only can thinking and memory be affected, but also our behaviors, communication, and response to certain situations. We'll take a closer look at the behaviors someone may exhibit and look at potential causes and the questions we need to ask to identify what could potentially be causing these behaviors. For example, someone who paces or uses repetitive movements. It could be that they're anxious or nervous. It could be that they're bored. Maybe they're hungry. Maybe they need to use the restroom. Maybe the music or the TV is too loud. We'll dive a little bit deeper into each of these things as we move throughout the presentation. Shouting or yelling could be an indication that a need isn't met. They could be in pain. So all of these things we're going to dive down a little bit deeper as we move through and explore in more detail. Given the information we briefly discussed, I'd like to take another quick moment here for a poll. What might indicate a possible cause of a behavior expression? A, hunger. B, lack of sleep. C, hallucinations. D, decreased impulse control. Or E, all of the above.
All right. Thank you, Kathleen. Everybody on your screen, if you just choose what you think, and then in a few seconds after everybody has voted, we'll let Kathleen know what our consensus is. All right, Kathleen, just a few more seconds. We've got some last-minute votes coming in. I think we're all here, and Kathleen, it looks like an overwhelming majority of us believe that it is all of the above.
That is correct. When I was going through this presentation with my daughter, she said, "Mom, you can't have two answers be all of the above." And I said, well, they're all important, so I'm just going to roll with that. But the correct answer is all of the above. Each of these just scratch the surface to the possible causes. So what do we look at and how do we put ourselves in our loved ones' shoes to determine the emotions and expressions they're trying to convey to us? There's 4 different keys that we're going to discuss to really unlock that mystery and the potential causes. Key number 1 is the environment. Is there something going on in the environment that may be causing them to have a behavioral expression? Is it too hot? Is it too cold? Is it noisy? Is it overstimulating or understimulating? My husband and I always joke that we hit 45 and he became the get off the lawn person and I became the turn down the music, it's too loud. So for me, if I go into a restaurant and the music is really loud, I can't eat fast enough and get out of there. So these are things that we need to think about when it relates to our loved ones. Charlie was a resident who also had aphasia, and his words often failed him when he needed them the most. It was the middle of January, and we were having one of those lovely Chicago cold snaps. We had a sprinkler pipe burst in our break room that shared the same hallway as Charlie's apartment. The staff and I spent the better part of the night cutting open drywall, pulling out insulation to start the drying out process. We checked the surrounding rooms and the water damage didn't seem to penetrate any of the nearby rooms. But a day later, Charlie was acting different. He was pacing more frequently and started talking about moving, that he needed to move. The staff and I became concerned because Charlie had recently moved in and it took us a good week to get him adjusted and settled. And we were concerned that he was talking about moving again and wanting to go home. Charlie was very independent. He got himself dressed every day. He took showers by himself. So the staff didn't necessarily enter his room on a daily basis. After 2 days of pacing and talking about moving, I happened to be following Charlie back to his apartment having a conversation. We entered his apartment and it was freezing in there. We didn't realize when we removed the insulation, it affected the temperature in his room and wouldn't hold the heat. I turned to Charlie and said, "Oh my goodness, it's freezing in here." And he looked at me, put his hands in the air and said, "Yeah." That's what he'd been trying to convey for the last day and a half. Charlie and I spent the rest of the afternoon finding the perfect apartment for him and moving all of his items so that it was set up just the way he liked it. His entire demeanor went back to calm. He wasn't pacing anymore, and you could see the weight of the world was lifted off his shoulders. And this could potentially, I don't think he was sleeping for a couple of days. This could have potentially gone the wrong way, and it just took that opportunity to really step back and dissect what's going on and how it was affecting his behavior. The second key we'll talk about is physical health. This is something that we train all of our staff in the communities to really pay attention to and look out for. Could the person have a urinary tract infection? We want to rule out, is there anything going on with the person physically or clinically that could cause them to be having these behaviors? So could they have a urinary tract infection? Urinary tract infection, for those of you who have had them, are very, very uncomfortable and painful. So a resident could be striking out because of that. An acute or chronic illness that may be causing pain. Someone who has arthritis, it could be that their hands bother them. Someone who has an old back injury, it's very difficult to sit in one position for a long time, or maybe throughout the night, it's very difficult for them to get comfortable. Constipation is another example and something that is very uncomfortable. If someone has ill-fitting shoes, that could potentially be a reason why. If they have blisters on their feet, maybe they're not wanting to walk like they usually used to like to do. Are their dentures fitting properly, or could they have abscess in their teeth? These are reasons that someone may stop eating. If they can't eat well, or their dentures are flopping around, or they have a big sore in their mouth, we may think, oh, they must need help eating, and maybe start to feed them. Maybe they start spitting out food. All of those are potential reasons. And we really need to put on that detective hat and figure out, could any of these potentially be causing the behaviors? And if we fix those, will the person stop having those behaviors? Some additional things are seasonal affective disorder. This is huge, and I think not until the last couple of years have I realized how much the change of the season and the dark of winter really affects me. The same is true for our loved ones and our residents. Key number 3 is engagement. I think so many times we don't put enough emphasis on keeping someone engaged. And that doesn't necessarily mean keeping them busy. It means giving them purpose and meaning to their days. So our loved ones and residents need to fill their days with meaning and purpose. They need a really healthy balance of productive engagement, which is feeling valued, leisure engagement, which is just simply having some fun, self-care engagement such as wellness, health, and personal care, and restorative engagement, which means getting that sleep and rest and feeling re-energized. When any of these items are not in place, many of the behaviors that we discussed early on can occur. Pacing, shouting, calling out, exit seeking. Those are all different behaviors that can occur because someone is simply bored or not engaged, doesn't feel like they have purpose. Our residents, when they move into communities, a lot of times they feel like they're losing that connection to the outside world. Our whole purpose with programming and engagement is to keep that connection alive so that when they move into our communities, they are living very purposeful and fulfilled lives. It's a balance to understand each of our residents and loved ones. Some of our residents prefer large groups, some of them small groups, and some of them only one-to-one activities. Our Embrace program focuses on creating that purposeful program and follows the daily rhythm and routine of our residents. That's why that embrace history is so important. And I know sometimes we have adult children who fill this out, but they fill this out knowing the routine of their loved one from 30, 40 years ago. I often think about that with my dad. If I had to fill out an embrace history on him, what would it say? He lives out of town and he comes to stay with us, or I go to stay with him. So I have a little bit of an idea of what his rhythm and his routine is during the day. But that is very much a living, breathing, working document for us. We ask the families to fill it out so that they can help us get a snapshot of who their loved one is, but then it's a working document for us. We may learn a funny story that the family didn't know. We may learn different things, and we continually use that document to help with interventions and to help with engagement throughout the day. I know for certain that some of the stories that people may learn about my father in his Navy days are stories that he shared with his son, but he certainly didn't share with his daughter. So there's different ways for us to gather all of this information. But with our Embrace program, we really strive to create communities where people with dementia come to live active, fulfilling, and connected lives. And that is truly the key to our Embrace program. We use our Be Inspired components, which are all the components that we work with our program directors and memory care directors to incorporate into their calendar. We want to make sure it's a robust calendar that's filled with opportunities for residents to move, opportunities for them to grow and learn new things, to feel, to reflect, to connect, and to contribute. I know for my father-in-law, he volunteered for the last 30 years with his church, with hospice. So feeling as though he can still contribute is something that is very, very important to him and a part of his daily rhythm and routine. One of our residents in one of our communities named Clarence isn't someone who typically likes to join large groups. He doesn't like the noise, and according to his family, he didn't have many interests outside of mathematics and spreadsheets. There was a desk located in one of the hallways closest to Clarence's apartment. We noticed, or the community team noticed, that Clarence liked to sit at the desk and go through the drawers. They found some old ledgers and an adding machine and left them in the desk. Clarence would dress in a suit coat and tie every day, and after breakfast each morning, he would head over to the desk, take off his jacket, drape it on the chair, and he would sit there and work on his spreadsheets and his adding machine every day. Although he didn't participate in a large group program, he found purpose and meaning in something that he used to do every day, and he was engaged. So when we talk about the different levels of engagement, we really try to focus on who that person was so that we can make it as purposeful for them as possible. The next key we'll talk about is communication. Gosh, this communication, I think for some people, we all think we're great communicators, but that's not necessarily the case all the time when you step back and really evaluate it. When communicating with someone with dementia, it's important to distill everything down to its base emotion. Are they happy? Are they sad? Are they stimulated? Are they comfortable? Oftentimes, we create our loved one's behavior expression or emotional response to a situation, even though we have the best of intentions. Here are some of the things that we do sometimes, not even realizing it. We give too much information too quickly. We talk too fast. I'm guilty of that. I also have a very high-pitched voice, so sometimes I have to really slow down and lower the tone of my voice when I'm speaking to one of our residents. We don't communicate at all. We just go up and do it. A perfect example of this is someone who may be in a wheelchair, whose back is to us, and we just go up and start pushing the resident without coming around, letting them know that we're there. If that was me, I would certainly be startled and start swinging out. We need to really explain what's happening to prepare the resident or your loved one. This is a big one for me. We don't get down on the person's level. We stand over them, which shows an authoritative stance. Throughout the dementia process, our residents, our loved ones are really trying to maintain as much independence as possible. And when they feel as they're being told what to do and people are barking orders, this can cause behaviors. So it's really important to get down to a person's eye level, even touch them on the hand so that they know that you're there and you're having a conversation. It doesn't feel as you're the authoritative figure. We don't wait for a response or time to process. We just think, well, maybe the person didn't hear us. So sometimes people start shouting, which isn't necessarily what's happening. A lot of times is that the resident can hear us, but their ability to process what we're saying to them takes a little bit more time. So we have to slow down and give them the opportunity to be able to respond to certain situations or respond to the question that you're asking them. Don't rush them. We're always in too much of a rush these days. We fail to build a connection and familiarity. So if we have residents or loved ones that begin to not recognize who we are, it's really important to develop that connection, the universal touch, gently stroking their hand, whatever you can do to show that familiar bond is really going to help decrease any type of behaviors that might be occurring. And perhaps one of the most significant things is our nonverbal and verbal language. A lot of times they tell two different stories, and we're going to get into that a little bit more in just a minute. So with our Embrace program, we really focus on developing our detective skills with our team members. We use the acronym WHAT. The W stands for who, what, when, where, and why. We ask these questions to assess the details of a behavior to unlock the meaning. So in every situation, whether we're talking about the 4 keys, the environment, the physical, engagement, we're really looking at the W in those 4 questions. Who is this happening with? Sometimes you'd be surprised. I had one particular lady who was the sweetest lady. She loved everybody. This one particular nurse who worked PRN and only worked a few times a month would come in, and this resident did not like her. She did not like her at all. She would make comments to other people and point at her and would not do anything the nurse asked her to do. Well, it took us a very long time to figure out what was going on, but one time she had a daughter, her daughter came to visit, and that nurse happened to be working. And I was having a conversation with the daughter, and I said, there is just something about her that your mom does not like. And the nurse was pretty close by and heard this conversation. And the daughter said, well, she looks exactly like the woman my father left my mother for. So I guess in that situation, we'd probably all not like her very well. What is happening? Is it really a behavior? I used to have a gentleman named Bob, and he would rearrange every pillow and every picture frame throughout the community all day, every day. It drove the staff crazy sometimes because he would pile them up and put them in different areas, and they'd have to run around and put everything back. But it really wasn't a behavior. It was something that was comforting to Bob and kept him engaged throughout the day. When is it happening? Is it happening at a specific time each day? This is really common for residents who live in a community and maybe they just had a family visit and the family's having a really difficult time trying to leave. Maybe the person is crying or trying to leave with them. So a really good rule of thumb there would be to visit during times where you know there's going to be something big happening afterwards. For example, a mealtime. Visit before mealtime so that you can gently direct that resident or that loved one into lunch or to breakfast or to dinner so that they can sit down and start having a conversation with a friend or eating, and then you can slowly slip out the door. Or during when there's going to be entertainment or an activity or something like that. Those are some good rules of thumb because that's something common we hear from families. The H in our acronym WHAT is help. Prevention is the best behavioral management strategy. Try and develop strategies to help your loved ones with their needs. Do they pace or get anxious when they need to use the restroom? Would putting them on a regular toileting schedule help them? And by all means, the A, this is huge. Adjust your approach, slow down, break down tasks, use a different change of pace. Sometimes with my father-in-law, it just takes one of the other siblings to step in, and they're able to help redirect him. And the last one, which is so important, especially if you are a caregiver caring for someone at home, teamwork. When all else fails, use your support system. Take a walk. Do not try and argue. Their reality is their reality. And I mentioned my father-in-law a few times, but for my father-in-law, oftentimes when he is feeling particularly obstinate, it's removing my brother-in-law from the scenario. My brother-in-law is amazing, but he just doesn't understand that reminding my father-in-law that he's forgotten something, or saying, Dad, it's just the way it is. We just have to do it this way. It doesn't help. In fact, it does just the opposite and causes my father-in-law to go into fight mode. Fighting to maintain his independence, that he's the grown-up and he's the son, and fighting to maintain his dignity. And really, a lot of times trying to cover up that something's going on. When my husband steps in, and I think a lot of times my husband's been able to be successful in this because I've drilled it into his head, but he's able to diffuse the situation. He's able to go with the flow. He apologizes and he sympathizes. And it's important to remember, an apology is not an admission of guilt, but an opportunity to soothe your loved one and move on. So here's what the acronym means. Okay, the next slide we're going to look at is our perspective. This is just kind of reinforcing what we've talked about over the last few minutes, but looking at our resident's view or a loved one's view as opposed to the person with dementia's view. So a lot of times we see a resident or a family member hitting, and what we don't realize is that they're trying to tell us a little bit more than that, but maybe they're not able to put the words together. A lot of times it can simply mean that they're afraid of something, or they don't recognize their surroundings. Or maybe we didn't stop and communicate what was happening, and so they feel fearful. If you're trying to change someone and you're not walking them through the steps, or you haven't developed that connection or that sense of familiarity, and you appear to be a stranger, that can be very, very frightening for our residents. This is a big one, getting up and down throughout the night. Sometimes we think, oh, they just need a sleeping pill. I don't understand why they won't sleep. Well, there can be more meaning to that. It could simply be, I used to have this resident who, this was in a very old nursing home years ago, where they had 2 hospital beds next to each other with a curtain. We would put Helen in her bed, her roommate in her bed, and sure enough, we'd walk out of the room and Helen would climb in bed with her roommate and just sit there rubbing her cheek next to hers. She'd slept next to her husband for 64 years. And all of a sudden, she moved into this tiny little double bed where she wasn't sleeping with anyone anymore. And I always joke with my husband, I like to cuddle, so that's probably going to be me jumping into everybody's bed so I can cuddle with them. But those are some things to think about. Another thing from a community standpoint, if we didn't know that that the resident was someone who worked the night shift, they could be up working the night shift with the night nurse and the night caregivers, and usually sleep during the day. So that's why that embrace history that I've referenced a few times is so important. We really need to know the history. We talked about this a little bit in the physical, a resident who's refusing to eat. It could be that they have a tooth abscess or their dentures aren't fitting. It also could be the food doesn't look appetizing anymore, or it's too difficult to eat. Maybe there's someone who needs finger foods, or maybe there's someone who the taste buds are starting to go. The last scent the last taste bud to typically go with someone with dementia is sweet. So that's why we've got lots of people who love their cookies and cakes and things that that we try to keep on a minimum. Sometimes that's all that tastes good anymore. So a couple things to think of. A few other things that aren't on the chart here, but I think are important to remember is that sometimes in the early stages of the disease process, some of our residents are convinced that people are stealing from them. And a lot of times it's just because they misplaced something, and it's a way of, again, a way of them trying to hide that anything is going on. I do this all the time with my daughters. Most of the time I'm right. They did take it and it is in their room, but I do feel very foolish when I just put it in a safe place, which I happen to do with Christmas presents and birthday presents. I always put them in a safe place and forget that they're there. So those are some reasons for that as well. I mentioned that we were going to, in one of the previous slides, that we were going to discuss nonverbal and verbal communication a little bit more. Having 2 teenage daughters, I feel like I repeat this mantra on a daily basis. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. It's your facial expressions and rolling of your eyes. It's why a lot of companies train their receptionists who answer phones to smile when they're talking, because if they smile when they're talking, it makes their voices sound cheerier. So when we think about communication, 7% of what we say is verbal. So 7% of what I'm saying to you is what you hear. 38% of what we understand is made up in the way it's said. This includes our volume pitch, our tone, and the rhythm of the communicator's voice. And then 55% of what we understand is made up of our facial expressions, our body movement, and our posture, the things that we see. We use this in training all of the time for our staff members who work on our memory care neighborhoods. If you walk into a resident's room with your hands on your hip and you say, "It's so good to see you," does that really convey that you want to be there, that you're excited to see the resident? Not really, especially if your hands are on your hip. Again, that's an authoritative pose. And if you're not maintaining eye contact or your voice sounds angry, all of those things do not convey happiness. We may say it's so good to see you, but that's not really what they're hearing and what they're interpreting. We often tell our staff members that whatever's happening, we've got to put in our back pocket because we're on stage all day long. And your behaviors and your response to situations, our residents are made up of behaviors, so they're going to mirror your response to situations. So you've got to put on that happy face. You've got to be positive. And also, the universal language here is touch. Coming up to someone and just touching their hand or walking arm in arm or holding hands are all excellent methods of nonverbal communication and can de-escalate a situation. That's been tough during this COVID time, is really being able to make those connections with our residents and our memory care neighborhoods because of COVID and 6 feet. But that is really what helps our residents get through the day, that sense of touch and how we communicate things. So I want to talk a little bit about the primary principles for communication in dementia. I encourage you to really take a step back and evaluate your communication and interactions. Here are a few strategies for improving communication. A person with dementia will experience changes in their ability to interpret the world around them. You can help your loved one navigate daily tasks and activities by guiding them, breaking down the tasks into easy to follow steps. Explain what is happening or going on. A lot of times in this situation, we create disabilities for our loved ones and for our residents before the disease necessarily would. We call it excess disability. So for example, We might have a person who is still able to get themselves dressed every single day, but maybe they go in and they put on the dirty clothes that they wore yesterday, or they'll go in and they'll pick out outfits that don't match or might be inappropriate for the time of season that it is. So it's important for us to be proactive and try and help them be successful. So if they can still get themselves dressed, why not lay out an outfit for them, or rearrange the closet so there's a few outfits to choose from, maybe this one or this one, and help them still be successful and feel like they're in control of the situation, but break it down into a more simplified task for them. Same thing with eating. Again, a lot of times we create that disability that we need to feed them when maybe it's just they need more time, or we haven't really looked at what's going on inside their mouth that they're not eating, or is picking up the fork, putting the fork in the food, lifting it to the mouth. Are those too many steps for our residents, and they would benefit from having finger foods? Those are all things to think about when communicating and thinking about behaviors. We talked a little bit about this on one of our earlier slides, but adjusting. As dementia progresses, a person's ability to communicate will change. It's very important for us to adjust our approach to their changing needs, but most importantly, for us to really adjust our expectations of the task at hand. This is something I see with my sister and brother-in-laws, is the expectations of what dad can still do. We need to adjust those a little bit and make sure that we have things that he can still be successful at. He still loves to write out birthday cards for all of his grandchildren. So maybe we address the envelope for him because he can't remember to look in his address book, and sometimes we'll just write the name on the card and leave it somewhere. So maybe we set him up for success by filling out all of that information and just allowing him to do the card. It's very important to really adjust our expectations and develop systems to break down tasks slowly and with smaller steps. Consistency. Verbal and nonverbal communication needs to match. Oh, I can't say this enough. Provide your loved one with comfort and reassurance, and pay close attention to their nonverbals. Not only do we have to pay close attention to our nonverbals, but we have to pay close attention to our residents' nonverbals. For example, I go back to the example I gave of Orpha. I could tell that she was hell-bent on getting over to Bob and giving Bob a piece of her mind. So we have to pay attention to that and step in and be able to redirect them onto something else, whether it's changing their mind on what their purpose was, or just reassuring them that you're going to take care of it. And lastly, emotional connection. Focusing on a positive emotional connection during conversation can help to improve communication and provide opportunities for more positive outcomes. I can still go back to a community that I worked at 5 years ago, and this resident is still there, Howard. Howard was someone who loved back rubs, and I would always see him in the hallway, and I would go up to behind him and scratch his back even before he saw me. And he would always say, "Oh, there's only one person who scratches my back like that." And to this day, I can gently go up, scratch his back, and he'll say, "I know who that is." So that emotional connection, that language of, that universal language of touch is so important in being proactive and trying to ward off some of the behaviors that may creep up with some of your loved ones. So I know we're getting close to about 1/4 and I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to ask some questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Paul so we can see if there's any particular questions that you guys may have today.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, for all that information. It was really beneficial, even for me, even being a part of Senior Lifestyle. So I really appreciate that. While we're waiting to see if anybody has any questions, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today. If you heard anything that really interested you, I really invite you to go to seniorlifestyle.com, and that's going to be able to show you where your closest senior lifestyle community is. When you call that community, you'll be able to speak to a director of sales and set up a virtual tour. In some buildings, you can even get an in-person tour right now. It just depends on the state and the county they're in. And they'll be able to show you what the community is like and what our memory care program really looks like here at Senior Lifestyle. Don't forget, the next webinar is September 3rd at this same time. And you will have to register just like you did for today's if you haven't already. And again, this webinar, we did record it, so it will get put on our YouTube channel. And just like last time, we'll send out the link to everybody who's on here. So in case, I know a few people were having a little bit of audio problems or connection problems, so you'll get everything. It'll just be in a day or two as we connect it. So yep, that was actually the very first question. So yes, this will, again, I'm going to make sure this gets emailed out to everybody. And then Kathleen, let me read this first, and then I will present it out to you.
Okay.
And then, so Kathleen, there's somebody whose friend is living in assisted living somewhere, and she actually doesn't have a memory of how she got there, and she's really feeling as if she keeps on telling family and friends that she's being held hostage. How can family and friends kind of redirect her and help her out?
Sure. So first and foremost, I think some of our residents, my father-in-law went through some of the similar situation when he moved into his memory care. And at that time, my directive to the family was don't take responsibility for it, because sometimes in the early stages of the disease, they start to blame their loved ones and feel like they're setting them up. And so with my father-in-law, we would have the conversation that this is the doctor's recommending you stay here. And put the onus back on the doctor. But as far as the hostage situation, she, to me, is sounding like she needs to form some type of connection with the people in the community. So I would ask the community, what type of engagement are they able to do? And again, it's going to depend, because of COVID, it'll probably depend on the state that they're living in, but what type of engagement are they doing? If she is sitting in her room all alone all day with nothing to do, then she's going to think of that she's being held hostage, because who wouldn't in a situation like that? So can they find some more meaningful ways for her to connect? Depending on her level of dementia, is she someone that loved dogs, and would a therapeutic dog or a cat be something that can help with connection? But usually in that type of situation, they're not connecting with the place that they're at and feeling as though it's a familiar environment. So I would really go back to, what can we do to help her feel a sense of purpose and belonging in that community?
All right, thank you, Kathleen. And we have another question is, somebody's mom lives far away, and her caregivers and many others are seeing a fast and steep decline in memory and behaviors. We're having a hard time getting the doctors to believe us. Do you have any suggestions for that?
So we talked a little bit about in our first session about really keeping a journal and being that resident's advocate. So I absolutely would highly recommend that you keep that journal. And if this doctor is not someone that is willing to do any type of clinical testing to rule out any other behaviors, then I would move on to another doctor. You can also use a gerontologist who can do some memory testing as well. That's an opportunity for you just to get a deeper dive and bring that to the doctor's attention if you don't want to switch doctors at this point in time. But you are the advocate. You know your loved one. You see the changes that are happening with them. So absolutely, I would either switch doctors, go to use a gerontologist and do some of the memory testing so that you can bring that document to the doctor the next time that you see them.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Kathleen. This one, it sounds like it might even be somebody from another community or somebody that works with seniors. So there's they have a resident or somebody who is very distant, always very few words, and they seem to walk away from the group activities all the time. How would you go about assessing this and trying to help this resident?
Sure. So I would go back to the 4 keys that we talked about. Is there something in the environment that's happening? Is it too loud for them? Is it too noisy? Is it overstimulating for them? I would walk through each of those keys. What do we know about this person's past? Are they someone who they were never someone who joined into programs or anything like that? I actually had a group of executive directors that I was training earlier this morning, and we were kind of talking about the engagement and our Be Inspired components that we use in each of our communities. And I jokingly said, I'm someone who never liked bingo, and I know that when if I'm 82 and I have dementia, I'm still not going to like bingo. So just because that I'm forgetful now doesn't mean I'm going to like bingo when I'm 82 and confused. So I often sit down with my girls and give them a hard time and tell them, remember, I don't want to play bingo. I need to have my Diet Coke every morning and run through things about me that I think that an assisted living community would need to know. But as far as this resident's concerned, what did they do for a living? Were they someone who, like I referenced Clarence, he was not someone who was going to join group programming because he didn't have many interests outside of mathematics and spreadsheets. So for him, we found purpose in being able to allow him to sit in an area by himself and work on those things. And then also I had another resident who moved into the community, and he had a very difficult time, but he quickly took on the role that he was running the community, and he would sit at the lunch table and he would tell everybody about how he was organizing different events for them and things like that, and that gave him a sense of purpose. And some of the residents would just kind of shake their heads and let him go on, but I think we need to do a little bit more digging. Do you have a history form on him that could give you some more insight as to what types of things he used to participate in as a younger person? Because there are ways to adapt that to still allow him to be able to do it now.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Kathleen. And I think this actually kind of follows up really well with that. Another question came in. What about somebody whose loved one keeps on going out to the mailbox multiple times a day? How can they help their loved one?
Sure. So I guess one of the things to think about there is that's a behavior that could be very frustrating to you, but what are they looking for? And is it a behavior to walk to the mailbox, maybe putting something in the mailbox? A letter, are they still able to read? Maybe putting a letter in there so that they feel like they have connection or found what they're looking for. That's a suggestion that you might be able to try too. And again, it goes back to what do we know about this person and what they did for a living, and what can we do to keep them engaged? Because it sounds like they're filling up their time by going out and checking the mail, but can we provide some type of purposeful engagement for them so that that's not what they're focused on?
Yeah, that's so important. Thank you for reminding us with that. And it looks like this might be one of the last few questions. somebody's taken their spouse home during this really tough time, and she just wants to know if there's any things that she should be looking out for decline.
Sure. So some of the declines that we often see in our dementia residents is maybe they start to sleep more during the day. That could be potentially something in the keys that we look at. Is there something more clinically going on that would cause that? Or is it part of the natural disease process? Are they having more difficulty walking, shuffling? It's that use it or lose it mentality. It's important for our residents to get up and walk, especially because with dementia, that depth perception becomes affected. And so it's really important for us to get up and walk with them, because that is something that starts to decline either because of the depth perception or because they're not using that muscle memory anymore, and they need that muscle memory to help with steadiness and balance and things like that. Another thing is eating. Are you seeing a decline in their eating? Sometimes our residents get to the point where they're having more difficulty. I mentioned picking up the fork, putting it in the plate, lifting it up to their mouth. Those are a lot of steps. So we need to really break down those steps for our loved ones to make it easier. I had one resident who would eat 100% of his meal if everything was put in a sandwich. So if we had chicken parmesan, I would make a sandwich with chicken parmesan in it and cut it in fours, and he'd be able to pick it up and eat it with finger foods. If it was on the plate though, even if it was cut up, it was just too many steps for him to kind of walk through that process. So that's something to look out for as well. Is I would really look at the walking, the eating, and the sleeping are some of the things I would kind of keep my eyes on.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kathleen. And we've answered all the questions. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, Kathleen. You're always a wealth of information, even for me. And everybody, thank you for spending this hour with us. Again, we will have the last and final part of the series on September 3rd. It'll begin at the same time, so don't forget to register for it. And we look forward to sharing our time with you again. Have a great rest of the week, everybody. And thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you so much.